Well, good morning. My name is Spencer Eccles. I'm the co-founder and a managing director at the Cynosure group, and been asked to help and facilitate, really. But we're going to take a few minutes for each of our panelists to introduce themselves and give a little bit of background. Each one is an expert in their field, especially as it relates to, obviously, to the economy. And there's definitely a lot going on in the world right now. And with an election about a year and a half away, which really I don't think is being thought about yet in the economy or translating through in the economy because of all the many things that are overshadowing it, such as trade, tax, China in particular, etc. So it'd be interesting to hear from each one of you, and I think we'll just, maybe if we can just go left to right, we'll start with Dave. Yeah, introduce yourself, and then maybe just give a little bit of background of where you see the world going right now, and then we'll dive in.
All right, that's
just to kind of wet everybody's whistle, and we'll go all the way through it. Let's see.
Turn this on somehow.
Yep.
So I'm Dave Altig. I'm the Director of Research at the Federal Reserve Bank of Atlanta. I've been in the Federal Reserve system for about 28 years. I'm also a member of the advisory board of the GIC. And the question was, where do I see the world going?
Well, yes.
Yeah.
Anything
Up and to the right.
up and to the right, that's good. Okay, perfect. We'll dive into the next one. That's the first time I've heard an economist be brief, but that's okay. And it was positive, too, which is also a little bit of an anomaly, but we'll continue. Go ahead, Patty.
Patty Healy. Hi, my name is Patty Healy. I work for Cumberland Advisors. It's an investment management firm, and the majority of our investments are in municipal bonds. My background, I started at Standard & Poor's, the rating agency covering water, sewer, electric, garbage, and gas bonds. And looking at the economies throughout the municipalities throughout the United States. And I still do that today. Cumberland is, David Kotok, who's the chairman of Cumberland, is also a member of GIC, and that's how I came to. Oh, still closer? Can you hear? Okay, did you hear everything I said? Enough? Okay. And I am a very optimistic person, and I'm even more optimistic after some of the comments I heard this morning. So I think we're going in the right direction, trying to go in the right direction. I guess we have a lot of disparity, but maybe from what Brian said, when you have these breakthroughs, then all of a sudden you get a solution. So I think we're going in the right direction.
Philippa.
Is this on? Oh, it is. Okay. I'm Philippa Dunne. I'm co-editor of the Licio Report. We're an independent newsletter covering macroeconomic trends, specifically labor force and international flows issues. And instead of saying where I think the world's going, because I honestly don't know, I'm going to say what I would like to see happen, which is that people would start thinking of economics in a different way. The ec in economics is the same ec as the ec in ecology, which is the home. So economics is the study of the running of the home, and ecology, of course, the study of the home itself, and the distribution of resources. And I think if we could bring things back in that direction, we would have a healthier future.
Great, thank you. Appreciate that, Philippa. Robert?
Good morning. I'm Robert Spendlove. I'm the senior economist for Zions Bank, so welcome to Zions. My office is about 11 floors down, so it was an easy commute. I've worked for Zions Bank for about 5 years. Before that, I worked in the governor's office for most of my career. Got to work with Spencer a little bit when we both worked for the governor's office. I also, in my spare time, I also serve in the Utah legislature, representing the area right around Little Cottonwood Canyon. In terms of how I see the economy right now, I see it as I'm cautiously optimistic. It all depends on what the president tweets every day, and every chance he gets to criticize the Fed or to a few of his recent comments where the Fed has gone crazy. The Fed is my biggest enemy. Jerome Powell should quit. Things like that probably make me less optimistic about our kind of long-term path. But I'm hoping that cooler heads will prevail, and also here in the West and in Utah, I'm very encouraged, and I see very strong signs.
Thanks, Robert. I appreciate that. Before we dive into a question, since we have a Fed party here, can you maybe just comment, give your thoughts about this break of the administration being as critical as they have been about the Federal Reserve, and what the impacts of that have been as you think about the policy that they've had, how they've eased on increasing rates after 9 consecutive rate increases. And now, just in the last few days, we've had the administration, especially Larry Kudlow, calling for a rate decrease from the Fed.
Yeah.
That's a lot.
So there is a president who is unhappy with interest rates not being quite as low as that president would desire, and as a consequence is very angry at the head of the Federal Reserve. Who am I talking about? I'm actually talking about Mariner Eccles.
There you go.
So
I thought it was Randall Quarles, but I'm not too sure.
no,
And I have a relation to both.
no,
But
I mean, maybe it sounds a bit familiar, but actually, I would appeal to actually responding to this question. Of course, I'm never going to respond to this question directly. President and Congress and other political players do what they do, and we try to keep our head low and do what we are supposed to do. That actually starts back in 1950 with Mariner Eccles. I don't know. He was the chair of the Federal Reserve Board at one point. I don't know if you know this. Presidents can't actually fire a chair or a governor of the Federal Reserve Board, but they can kind of wait them out. Jay Powell has 2 appointments. He has an appointment as a governor, which is a term for about 14 years, and he has a term as the chair that only goes for 4 years. So after 4 years, the chair of the Board of Governors has to go up for renomination, which is made by the president and then confirmed again by the Senate. Now, if the president decides he or she doesn't want you to be the chair anymore, you're still allowed to stay on the board as a regular old governor. Presumption is that typically won't happen, but it did happen with Governor Chair Eccles, who stuck around after President Truman had a disagreement with him about whether or not the Federal Reserve should continue to keep interest rates low, basically to put a cap on war finance debt at a time when the economy was actually beginning to turn out of a wartime stance, and the concern was inflation. That disagreement convinced President Truman that maybe another person was the best person for the job, nominated a new person was put in place, but Governor Eccles stuck around. That was important for the following reason. He wasn't alone on the Board of Governors of being skeptical about pressure from the administration to keep interest rates lower than what the Fed thought was consistent with sound monetary policy. There was a meeting, it was behind closed doors, between the president and the Board of Governors of the Federal Reserve, and they could not come to an agreement. Nonetheless, the president decided to, I guess, what in was the old-fashioned tweet, went out and just basically made a pronouncement that we have come to an agreement, the Fed is going to keep interest rates low, everybody relax, I'm getting what I want. That wasn't the truth. The truth was that the board wanted no part of it. They called up Governor Eccles, the press did, and said, hey, is this true? And he goes, well, no, let me show you the minutes. And Truman was sort of basically put back in his chair. That was the first shot toward eventually what became known as the Treasury Accord of 1950. and what the Treasury Court in 1950 was, and there was a bunch of machinations around that as well, but it was basically the statement that lives with us today, that the Federal Reserve is independent and autonomous from political pressure in its deliberations on monetary policy. This is deeply, deeply ingrained in the institutional culture. It's really pretty deeply ingrained in the political culture as well. So all of that is a long way of saying, and a shout out to the Eccles and to Utah, who has this huge role in the history of the Federal Reserve, that I think that, in the end, I mean, what will happen is what has happened since 1950, and that is, in the end, monetary policy is conducted more or less free from political concerns and proceeds on the basis of grounds that will best support sort of our mandate. And our mandate is to maximize employment growth and to maximize and to maintain stable inflation. Just to quickly answer kind of the question about the rate hikes. The rate hikes were part and parcel of fulfilling that mandate from my point of view, clearly from the point of view of the committee, and it was just simply a way to get from the rather extraordinary circumstances out of the crisis and through the recovery to the place that we're now willing to call something like normal.
Thank you very much. I really appreciate that. So, with the Fed as a backdrop and the administration and the pressure that's being applied or attempting to be applied, let's think a little bit about the economy, and I'd love to have your response. So, we've just experienced the best quarter as measured by the S&P for nearly a decade. And that's, of course, coming off of a really poor December, which erased most of the earnings for the year or the gains in that area. Our December was the worst since 1931 at the end of 2018. And now the market sits today somewhere near 3.6% below its all-time high. In addition, we're in the second longest economic expansion in the history since the war time area, and that's 117 months. And in spite of these indicators, however, we've seen 10-year Treasury yields tick down to about 2.4%. I think they sat this morning at 2.38 in terms of their yield. 2.48 this morning. And we have a slight inversion between the 12-month T-bill and the 10-year. Those both sit on the last measurement I was looking at about 241, and in between we have a dip. So historically, an inversion in the yield curve is something that reflects an impending recession. We're not there yet, but we do have this little blip, and so the world is a little bit murky as it relates to some of those indicators. We have a trade war. We have a red line in the sand, if you will, that if we don't get something done with China, that more punitive actions will be taken. We have an overlay of a tax break that occurred, I guess, now going on a couple of years. We have an expanding national debt and record low unemployment. And I know some of you have written about unemployment, wages, unemployment, and the pressures going up or down on wage growth. So all of that in context, along with the fact that in 2020 we have an election, and I mentioned that I don't really feel that it's impacting the economy yet or the mindset. Everybody's really busy thinking about a lot of things, and some of which, as Robert noted, are some of the latest tweets. There's a lot going on, and there are a lot of thoughts. This morning, people are talking about the second half of this year is going to be better than most think. One analyst is calling for a 5-year expansion, and that this tepid growth that we've had is really important and helpful for the economy. So those are a lot of thoughts and factors. Correct me where I got it wrong. or reflect on that if we could. And maybe we could start with Philippa, because you do some really unique, thoughtful things about looking at the economy. And maybe then we can go to Patty, and then we jump over to Robert, if that'd be all right.
Okay, so I'd like to address the wage issue.
Yeah.
There's been a lot of, many people sort of think of it as a mystery why wage growth remains so weak. But to me, it's really not a mystery. The Great Recession hammered workers in a way that we haven't seen since the Depression. I don't think there's any question. And we've been left with a number of distortions. One of them is a large number of people who are working part-time for economic reasons, and David Blanchflower of Dartmouth has recently come up with the idea that that's one of the things that's really keeping down wages. Businesses still know they can hire more, put in more hours, so they don't really have to raise wages. The other thing is, I think that in an economy that's so based on consumption, it's very dangerous to have such income disparity. So the policies we have in place are stimulating certain aspects, but they're not really helping the spending power of the lower income groups. And that's something that I'm wondering if we're beginning to see now in some of the data.
Thank you. Appreciate that. Patty?
So maybe I'll just talk about how municipalities seem to have fared since the recession. And one of the big things that's kind of good is that they've all, or for the most part, I mean, don't talk about Detroit or a few other places, but overall, most of the municipalities have reestablished their rainy day funds. Back in 2008, when there was such a decline and ratings got downgraded, the municipalities didn't have money to fund services that they wanted to, things like that. They've now made a big effort to establish their rainy day funds and grow them. So that, on average, I think some of them are up to 15, 17% of their budget. So that's very good. Some of that fund balance might be reserved for some things, but on whole, it seems that people are worried about that happening. Now, it's interesting, we haven't seen wage pressure in public finance for a long time, but we're starting to see some of it. Teachers are striking all over, in Texas and New Jersey, in all places. So, and in Los Angeles, and they've actually been able to get some pay increases. Of course, they haven't had any for a long time. So you're seeing some pressure. You're also hearing some municipalities saying, we're having a hard time getting new talent, or that we can pay, and we're gonna have to start paying up for it because they just have to do that. I don't know if we're gonna get to our formalized comments, but one of the things that municipalities really need to fund now is cybersecurity. It's a big issue, and they cannot afford not to do it. They're on the forefront of protecting our water, of supplying our electricity. They have private information for citizens, so they need to protect that. So on top of everything else that municipalities have to do, for the most part, we're also seeing, and I think a big part of the discussion here today is the gap between the haves and the have-nots, and that's evident in all cities. Everyone's looking for doing some kind of affordable housing, so that's another struggle that they have. They have the social service costs and things like that. So, but it's funny because their revenues are getting better. Their budgets, they try and constrain them, but revenues are going up, and there's people that are left behind. So, but on the most part, it seems like the economy is still growing. So,
Robert?
So what I've been watching really closely is what's happening with confidence indicators. We have business confidence, consumer confidence, CEO confidence, and it was really interesting. You can see kind of the inflection point where confidence changed dramatically to the upside right after the 2016 election. I mean, it was essentially moving along. The election happens and it jumps way up. And I think there was that expectation of heightened economic activity. But, and we saw that kind of stay higher for about 2 years. But just recently, within the last few months, we've seen confidence dropping dramatically. And both of you look at things like the NFIB Small Business Confidence Index, if you look at consumer confidence, if you look at CEO confidence, it's dropping pretty dramatically. And I think what part of that is there was kind of a promise made by the incoming administration that there would be, a focus on building the economy and building economic fundamentals. But now, as we're seeing the actions of the administration, people are getting very concerned, and there's a number of things weighing out there, kind of weighing on the minds of people around the country and around the world. The trade deal or the potential trade war with China it could have an enormous impact on our economy. The trade war with Mexico. The president over the weekend threatened to completely close the border with Mexico. If he were, and he said he'd do it, he said, I'll do it next week, and I'm serious. Now, if you take the president at his word, that is a very concerning statement. We would lose about $1.6 billion in trade every single day if he were to close the southern border. And he has taken steps to cut off funding for Central American countries that that are desperately in need of help, and he does it because he's not happy that migrants are coming from those countries. And then, kind of outside of our direct control, but having a big impact, is what's happening in England with the Brexit vote. And what's really interesting, it's a very similar dynamic going on in England, where what essentially drove the Brexit vote was they're not happy with immigrants coming into their country. They're not happy with open markets, and so they're trying. The push is to close in. Now, unfortunately, they've been working at this for 3 years. The deadline was last Friday, and they missed it. And the next deadline is in a couple weeks, and who knows if they're going to be able to make that. But if they can't come up with a deal, they may end up with a hard Brexit, which means that they essentially just leave the European Union with no real trade deals. Again, that could be catastrophic to the European economy. All this, now, if we were able to resolve all these things, our economic fundamentals really are pretty good. Our unemployment rate is low. Our inflation is low. Things are looking good overall, but we've got all this overhang and this uncertainty that is making people more nervous and can actually cause the economy to slow overall if we can't resolve some of these issues.
Thanks, Robert. Appreciate it. Oh, Philippa, yeah.
I just wanted to add something about the confidence issues. The person who puts together Michigan Confidence, Richard Curtin at the University of Michigan, he comments on the different publications. And he recently pointed out that never before had there been such disparity in the reactions of Republicans and Democrats. They only sporadically publish the information on how different respondents are responding. But ordinarily, when a Republican is in office, there's about a 20% difference between Democrats and Republicans. Republicans better, obviously. But after Trump was elected, the Republican sentiment shot up something like 60 points. So suddenly there was like an 80-point gap between the two of them. And they haven't republished anything recently with this information, but I'm wondering if that gap is beginning to close a little bit.
Interesting. Thank you very much. I know you have some formal thoughts, and maybe we can go, David, to you about that and anything else to add on to this, and then we can just bounce down to Patty and Philippa.
So I'll make 2 comments. One about the wage growth. I don't find the pace of wage growth all that surprising. It turns out that if you kind of just think about wage growth as the sum of labor productivity growth and, the Fed doing its job right and 2% inflation over the longer term, you can pretty much describe the dynamics of wage growth over the entire recovery period, really, for the most part. So we had a long period stretch where wage growth appeared to be stuck in the 2 to 2.5% range. That was really quite surprising. But productivity growth was under 1%. It was like, 0.75%, 0.5% at times. Productivity growth was very low. Wage growth has accelerated now up to closer to the 3 to 3.5 range, depending on what measure you look at. And that has been coincident with an upsurge over the past several years in productivity growth. This productivity growth thing is important and it involves basically three elements. There is basically human capital. Are we skilled up? Are we training our workforce appropriately and expanding the capacity of people to be productive? The answer to that is, probably not as much as we should. Second piece is basically capital investment. That has been up, at least before the last couple of years, very, very disappointing. And if you don't give workers the tools with which to be productive, they are not going to be productive. Maybe that has turned around, but I think I completely agree with this sense that it's a risk-off world we're living in. We very seldom, we spend a lot of time in the Federal Reserve talking to folks, talking to people like you. I know if you listen to Squawk Box and Jim Cramer or somebody like that, it sounds like we're cloistered away. Maybe the people in Washington are. I don't think they are, but maybe they are. But we live out in the world, those of us who work in Federal Reserve banks. And we spend a goodly amount of our time. In fact, I have maybe 17 employees who spend all of their time, 100%, out talking to people face to face about what's going on in the world. And when we talk to businesses, we very rarely hear stories of, I'm investing because I'm planning on expanding like crazy because growth looks like it's never going to end to me and the opportunities are endless. That's just not what we hear very often. And I think that's what you want to hear with the great kind of leap forward that we hope we might see out of something like a 2% or less growth of GDP path. The third piece of productivity growth is just basic know-how, and maybe that's the thing that's actually the head scratcher. We kind of know we need better skills, better opportunities, more mobility across the board in our labor force. We know we need sustained capital investment, but if you read the newspaper, if you look at magazine, you figure out this AI stuff and this big data stuff and all this stuff is like this big bucket of technology we can just stick our hand in and pull out something great. To me, that's a completely wrong narrative. These are great things. These are world-changing things. This is an industrial revolution that we are on the forefront of. Just like the steam engine and just like electrification and portable power, just like portable computing, this is something big. But we know something from all those other industrial revolutions. Things get worse before they get better. And part of the reasons, I think your story about cybersecurity is exactly one of the reasons that it takes so long for these great innovations to really come to full promise. And that is, we don't know what they're all about at first. We do lots of stupid things with them, like pets.com or something like that. It creates as many problems as solutions at first, and cybersecurity is the perfect example. And we don't understand at first how to combine people with technology. We learn it, and it opens up a vast range of possibilities for everybody. Think about what technology could do for disabled workers. It's almost unfathomable, but we haven't really figured it out yet completely. We will, But until we do, I mean, expect kind of a slow slog that has actually shown up in the productivity numbers. It'll get better. I hope it's before I get retired, but it will happen.
Thank you, Dave. Patty.
So looking at, when you look at public finance, you're looking at the local economy, and it's affected by the outside economy. But in addition to looking at wages and income growth and population growth and employment, you're also looking at the diversity of the taxpayers and the businesses there. And just a comment on Utah, I think everyone here knows it's a AAA rated state across the board. And it's exemplary. It's mostly quote unquote an urban state, even though you have tons of land, but it's considered mostly urban. And even the municipalities within Utah are all doing very well. They're in the AA rated credit quality. That's the ones that we see as investors. There may be smaller towns that maybe banks are locally financing, but on the whole part in the big market, Utah's up there. I think it's benefiting from the expense of the coasts coming in, but I guess it's getting very expensive here as well, so something for things to be managed. I came here, I thought I was going to be talking about opportunity zones, so I'll take the opportunity
great.
to
Thank
talk
you.
about them now. First, I want to say last year I visited Utah and I visited the Columbus Center. I got a tour of the facility and I also saw the blueprints and the mock-up for the hub of opportunity. And I've not seen it before. I know I've seen people trying to work on it for people that I know whose children are autistic or worrying where they're going to live when the parents pass away and what's going to happen. So at any rate, it was wonderful to see that. So now, not fast forward, but at the end of 2017, when the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act was passed, there was also the Opportunity Zone legislation was passed. Finally, I think it had been in the works for a while, and it's bipartisan, so hopefully it will continue. There were 8,700 opportunity zones designated throughout the country. Governors got to decide which areas were opportunity zones. Most of them are designated by census tract, and they're all low income as far as I can tell from the stuff that I've seen. Some of them are in the middle of urban areas, some of them are in rural, some of them are contiguous. So there's a lot of opportunity zones out there. But also with the tax legislation came the creation of opportunity funds. Opportunity funds, well, wait, let me back up. The opportunity zones people knew that we were talking about the income differentiation before. So these opportunity zones were seen to have, not that many services for the people there. They were low income, underserved, and the people that live in the area can't even afford to, well, where they work, they can't afford to live. So that was some of the reasons why. And so, hang on just a second. Oh, if you want. I just thought we
sorry.
were going in
Yeah.
a different order than before.
Yeah, no, I'm sorry about that.
But all right. Okay, so now these places, they're mostly expected to be real estate investment, and real estate's kind of a risky investment, and these areas are not, there's not a lot of economic growth or what have you. So the tax law basically said you can invest in an opportunity fund. You can take any capital gains that you have got or earned, and you can put them into an opportunity fund by the end of this year, and you will defer the capital gains on that. You'll defer the capital gains tax on that capital gain for an extended period. If you leave it in the opportunity fund for 5 years, you can even write down that. Say you put in $100,000 in capital gains, you can bring that down to 90%. If it's in there for 7 years, you can bring it down to 85%. You would only be taxed on. And then if you leave the money in the opportunity fund for 10 years, you then don't have to pay any capital gains on the original investment. So for some people, it could be very lucrative. They're avoiding a lot of taxes. I think some of the risks are that you have your money tied up for a long period of time. It's real estate. It's generally a risky investment, and maybe there might be some tax law changes that could affect it. But since it was a bipartisan legislation, maybe there wouldn't be. Also, if you're investing in an opportunity fund, you have diversification, the benefits of diversification. So some of the real estate projects go down, other ones go up, and hopefully you're getting a return. Unfortunately, in my discussing this with people over the year and a half or so, most real estate people I talk to say that they would not invest in most of the opportunity zones. Maybe 1/3 would be invested in. So fast forward to impact investors. And environmental, social governance is what impact investors are worried about. And back a little bit, but people were worried that these opportunity zones were going to be taken advantage of. They were maybe already going to be in gentrifying areas. Those are the ones they're going to be invested in. You're probably going to actually not serve the people that this legislation was intended to serve. It's going to force them out because the rents are going to get too high. So bring in the impact investors. People worried about environmental, social, and governance. And also some people are worried that, this is just real estate and retail development. What about education? I know people in the charter school space that are like, can't we, get an investment to do something with the schooling in the area or job training? Just, expand it a little bit more from housing. So the Kresge, and I hope I'm pronouncing it properly, the Kresge Foundation and the Rockefeller Foundation got applications from various opportunity funds, and they wanted them to be impactful opportunity funds. They thought they were going to get a few applications. They got about 100 of them or so. And there was an article in the New York Times a couple of weeks ago about this. So they narrowed it down to 2 investors, Acturus and then Community Capital Management, which I'm familiar with the people there, and they are very detailed impact investors. One of the other problems with the legislation is that in order to make it creative for the real estate developers, they pretty much didn't have any rules in there, so they could potentially be abused. So what Kresge found with giving the money to the state Community Capital Management, they have very, very formalized impact requirements for what they want to see. The other thing about impact investors is that they want to make sure that the impact that they think they're financing or investing in is going to actually have that impact. So there needs to be transparency, there needs to be measurable outcomes, there needs to be consistently following up on that, and that's what Community Capital Management and the other company do. So that's only 22 million, and what that 22 million will do will hopefully leverage the money that the people that got all those capital gains invest in the fund. Because why would you invest in something that you're not going to get a return? You might as well just donate the money. So people are looking for an investment, but they want a return. So the money that the Kresge Foundation is giving is to provide guarantees, seed capital, cover certain losses, so that if it wasn't it's not as profitable, it'll at least have some return for the investor. It seems like there's going to be a waterfall of this. There's a lot of, first of all, there's a lot of opportunity funds being established every day. There's a database or online system, Opportunity DB, and they seem to be keeping track of them. So there's about at least 87 funds established to date that they're keeping track of, with 26.3 billion already invested. So these funds are out there. You can just Google Opportunity Fund and you'll find them. And I think if you find one that you want to invest in, if you want to do locally, you maybe call the managers and say, I don't want this to just be a return for me. I want to make sure it's having an impact, and how can we put that into that? And maybe you could increase the marketing of that fund because of it. I don't know, something to think about. And the last thing is the National Development Corp has been around for, 50, 60 years. They help municipalities come up with plans for development, and they're trying to help them do outreach to these opportunity funds. Because the other thing is that these projects have to be funded and almost completed within like 30 months. So they need to find projects on the ground ready to go. There's a lot of stuff that has to happen. So there's cities that are trying to help themselves. They're like Erie, Pennsylvania, and Louisville, Kentucky have their own little prospectuses if you want to do an opportunity zone investing in those areas. So at any rate, there's a lot of resources out there, and I believe there's other foundations that are possibly going to be doing seed money or grant money, so that these opportunity funds that are impact-oriented we'll be able to, attract investment and improve the low-income areas.
Patty, thank you very much. And we do have a number of funds that have formed in Utah already. And in fact, we'll hear from one of the managers, I think, later today in one of the panels as well. Philippa?
Okay, so if we're sort of going over what we were planning to present, Stephanie mentioned the panel at Davos this year, and I have a report from the Bureau of Labor Statistics. It's a similar movement. So when the BLS was founded in the early 20th century, the then commissioner said that the American people know more about cattle and hogs than they know about their own workforce. So the BLS now provides a lot of very, very rich data. It's used, it's misused, it's subject to highly creative conspiracy theories, and the people who like those the most seem to be the BLS employees themselves. But I'm confident that they're working to produce the best data they can. So within the big sectoral outbreaks, the meta sectors would be service and goods producing, and then within that, the super sectors, manufacturing, well, formerly, but education and health, leisure and hospitality. There's very detailed data. You can actually find out who's working in spun sugar candy, synthetic mesh operations, but then other data really isn't broken down. So private military contractors are listed in services to buildings, things like that. When I was first invited to speak here, I wanted to obviously break out data on workers with disabilities. And at that point, you had to call the BLS and get them to send you the data. So last week when I was putting together the graphs, I found that you can just pull everything right off their data sets now. So that's public pressure, public interest, and that's a real improvement. The point I really want to make is in the employment statistics, there are basically two sets. One set is measuring sort of structural interest, and the other set is measuring well-being. So there have always been people in the world who really understand what under and unemployment does to people, and who also understand that living in poverty is actually somewhat different from being under or unemployed. And we recently lost Alan Kruger, who did amazing work detailing what really happens when people are under or unemployed. So I really believe that every day the work at the Columbus Center is a tribute to his legacy, because you are dealing with those very things. And in the employment statistics that relate to people with and without disabilities, the ones that I'm calling structural, which are the breakout between sectors, are almost comically similar. I put together a table, which we don't have to look at, but I decided not to put in the decimal points, and things turned out exactly the same. 2% in art management, 2%, with disability, without disability. Same movements between the number of women who do certain jobs. There'll be increases in women in certain sectors. It moves exactly the same way. But for the statistics that more measure well-being, there's a world of difference and a world of hurt. And so there you're seeing, for instance, the people with a disability represent 4% of the labor force. And I actually was trying to check that statistic earlier because it seems that it couldn't be true, but if you remember the numbers even vaguely, it is. So that's Stephanie's 4% of corporations with policies. This translates to a 28% participation rate for people with disabilities, with a disability, which compares to about 63% for the overall and 68% for people without. So participation is down for everyone. That's a structural problem we have ongoing. But for people with disabilities, it's something that we can actually do something about. So the 2 points. And then the third point is that these things do not have to be this way. the trends move the same way. So unemployment among people with a disability rose a lot, of course, during the Great Recession, as it did for everyone else. It's a little less cyclically sensitive, but it's moved back in the same direction. So we've seen the unemployment rate for people with a disability fall, the participation rate rise, and that can continue to happen. Part of it's policy, but most of it's on the ground work. So there's real opportunity there, opportunity with a built-in uphill battle. And I just want to say thanks for being on the field.
Thank you, Philippa.
So in my remarks, I just want to quickly kind of go from global to very local. I spend a lot of my time studying the Utah economy and kind of what's happening in our state. And things are looking really strong in our state right now. We've got the third fastest growing state in the country. We continuously rank among the fastest growing states. We're kind of in a battle with Idaho and Nevada for who will be the fastest growing state. We also are seeing a lot of people moving into the state. So Utah is very unique. Everyone knows this, but we've got very strong what we call natural increase. So that's essentially births minus deaths. So we've got a really strong base of our natural increase that many states don't have. And so that was about over 30,000 people added to our state's population through natural increase. But then you add on top of that, an additional 25,000 people moved into the state last year. So we added over 50,000 people in our state. And that net migration is a really important one because it shows the relative strength of a state's economy compared to other states. So if your migration is out, it means that your economy is weaker relative to other similar economies. If it's up, it means that people are moving in. And not only is it up, but it's accelerating. So we're seeing a lot of attraction to our state. Now, a result of that is you mentioned that we're one of the highest densities in the state, and that's essentially just because everyone lives right here. I mean, you can essentially see the entire population of Utah by looking out these windows, which is only kind of a joke, but about 80% of the population in Utah lives along the Wasatch Front. And then we, have a little bit more in Logan, a little bit more in St. George, and that's it. And so we have very high population density. Where do we see the growth happening? Right in this area. Utah County is projected to go, it did grow 2.7% last year. That's compared to the state growing 1.9%. So Utah County continues to just be kind of a powerhouse for our population growth. We are forecasting that within the next 50 years, so Salt Lake has a population just over 1 million people. And we're forecasting that Utah County will surpass Salt Lake County as the county with the largest population in the next 50 years. So we're seeing a lot of growth happening there. When we look at unemployment, the story is very similar. For last month, Utah has the second fastest growing job market in the nation, right behind Nevada, growing twice the U.S. growth rate. So we see very strong employment growth in addition to that population growth. Again, where is it happening? Utah County. So remember, the state's rate is 2.8%, 2.728. The Utah County, 4.7%. That is just phenomenal growth that we're seeing. Also, Washington County grew over 6%. That's in employment. So we can really see those economic drivers of our state are very strong right now. One of the areas that I'm a little nervous about, we now have the 11th lowest unemployment rate in the nation. Now, low unemployment sounds great until you start to have labor shortages. And that's what we're seeing. We're seeing, when I go out and speak to groups, I hear this all over the place, that employers are really struggling to find qualified workers. I was up in Logan last week, and an owner of several McDonald's came up to me after, and he said, "Has anyone heard about job ghosting?" Have you heard about this? So it's just, so it used to be with dating, when you broke up with someone, you just never talked to them again. People are doing this with jobs now. They go to lunch and they never come back. And they never call and they never say anything. I heard about someone who is in the building just to the south of us. So, a major employer, this person was making over $200,000 a year. Last week, he walked off the job. He left so fast that he left his coat on his chair and had to send someone to go get it. So, this is, so it's happening at all different levels, everywhere from McDonald's to high executives. And here's the problem, that may be great for the worker, but it's really bad for the employer, and it's really bad for trying to compete and to grow. And so while it's good that we have low unemployment, it's in the range that is making me nervous. And then when you look within the state, Utah County, once again, 2.6% unemployment. So the result of that, what's really interesting is, so Zions Bank conducts our own consumer confidence survey, similar to the one produced by the Conference Board. And we have always seen consumer confidence above the national average until about 2 years ago. About February of 2017, it flipped, and we saw consumer confidence in Utah dip underneath consumer confidence at the national level, and it continues to this day to be just under. Now, they're both really good. They're both high, in the level that would indicate economic prosperity. However, Utah's below the nation. A reason for that is around the same time we saw inflation in Utah start to dramatically accelerate. Where at the national level, inflation is right around 2%. I mean, that's the Fed's goal, is 2% inflation. Where's inflation in Utah? Right now, 3.9%. It's twice the inflation at the nation. And that's down from over 5% a couple months ago. So what we're seeing is this pressure on people. And where we're really seeing this, and we all know about this, is housing. Housing prices are accelerating too quickly, and what that's doing is that's driving out affordable housing for that first-time home buyer, that young family trying to find their first home. It is becoming more and more unattainable, and it's getting people worried about whether they can survive in a state like Utah. We've always been known as lower wages, but we also have lower cost of living. And now we're starting to see that struggle as that cost of living is accelerating so quickly. So I think that's an area that policymakers need to be putting a lot of attention into, something we need to really be focusing on to really help not only those individuals that need affordable housing, but also our entire community.
Thanks, Robert. And I know we are at the end of our time. We got 5 more minutes. Do you want to take questions, Stephanie? Okay. Well, let me just preface with these pressures on wages, with ghosting, so to speak, and with the loss of our low-income housing. There's a lot of challenges we face, and I think we'll see more wage pressure here. Utah has been, Salt Lake City in particular, has been one of the most mobile or economically mobile states or cities in the country in terms of people being able to increase their wages and opportunity, and that's something I think that's bucking the national trend. I don't know if that is good in general, but the one thing is it also leads to the opportunity for corporations to think more about hiring individuals with disabilities and how can they work that into their project. And I did something with Stephanie about 8 years ago where we had a fulfillment situation and a job in the Governor's Office of Economic Development. I outsourced that completely to Stephanie and her team. And what the result was, it opened up a space for me. It opened up a couple of positions for me that I could hire some new people in to do some other work that I needed to have done because I was able to outsource that to the Columbus Center and Community Center. And I was really grateful for Stephanie and all of her work for that. And I think there's opportunity for all of us to rethink how we do things and some of the jobs. And I think that's an economic opportunity, a strategic opportunity. And some of the panelists today have written about that and the benefit for your company. So with that, we can take probably one or two questions, if there's anybody else. Oh, Philippa.
I just wanted to say one thing about the job ghosting, and that is that actually goes both ways. So there have been a number of very detailed articles recently that the same thing happens to, say, a candidate with a graduate degree who goes for a job interview and never even hears "thank you for coming in." So I think when that happens, then the first question is, did I ask for too much? So that also feeds into the wage weakness.
Mm-hmm. Well, and that, when we go into a downturn, that will have a tremendous negative impact across people and companies as well in terms of their reputations and what happened, I think. Anyway, one or two questions. Yes?
Yeah, so did you ever hear that? So
Let's repeat that question.
if we have ongoing 2% growth, which of course would have been a disaster when I was in graduate school, I would have thought of this as a terrible thing. What are the ramifications for it, and what are the potential implications? I mean, that's a very it's a very tricky thing to answer, because a big part of that slowdown is labor force growth, which is essentially population growth. So on a per capita base, so I mean, the analog would be Japan. We think of Japan as this terrible, slow growth kind of economy, but per person, they're actually doing pretty well. I mean, it hasn't been all that bad. So, I mean, when I think about kind of how we ought to react to the 2% growth, I mean, there are two sides of it. The one side is what I alluded to earlier. Growth is basically the sum of two things. How fast is your labor force growing, and how fast is productivity growing? Labor force is kind of baked in the cake a little bit. So if you don't get more population growth the old-fashioned way, and I don't think that we're moving very quickly in kind of that direction, you got to get it through immigration. And we're not moving very quickly in that direction either. So that's kind of baked in the cake. So it leaves you the productivity issue, which is where really the focus sort of needs to be. I'm a relative optimist about this, but we're a long way from doing, I think, everything we could do. There is a political economy element of what happens, even though on a per person basis, we're doing okay. What happens when you're no longer the biggest economy in the world, and what happens when you're no longer the biggest free economy in the world. But I'm just an economist, and that's way above my rank.
That's great. We're good. Yeah, no, I think the work that Stephanie and her team do is incredible. And I just want to come back to that point I made earlier about the opportunities related to outsourcing some of your functions. There are tremendous opportunities. One of the challenges we face as organizations is we don't know where to find that. And Stephanie knows, and you can always just reach out to her. Everybody here knows her, and she may not be the right person for your need, but she can direct you to someone. And I just want to thank each one of our panelists for coming into town, especially in preparing for this. I've read a little bit.
I came all the way from Sandy.
Yeah, I know. That was the most dangerous part and the most difficult because of the traffic, but we're working on that. It's one of our greatest challenges in the state is our growth and how we're going to work with that. But I appreciate the thoughts around that they put into this. I think the future's bright, but it's not without challenges on either side. When things are going down, you have challenges. When things are going up, you have challenges. But, with great people, in the Federal Reserve, the work they're doing there, and the analytics, the opportunity zones, and everything that's going on, we just have to figure out how to gather more data. And I was grateful, Philippa, to hear how it's easier to gather data, because I was looking also, and it was not readily available. And if you don't have that, it's hard to know the impact of how we can include members of our community that are disabled or have various challenges. So thank you very much, and thank you to our panel.